Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today we are here with a session on the daily Hindu analysis for 25th of January 2024. Now before we begin, a quick reminder to all of you. If you are somebody who's looking to prepare and you are looking for some guidance for preparing for this examination, we can help you out here with our guidance, and for that we have a form below. Please fill the form and our experts will get in touch with you. So let's begin with the session for today. Now, the very first thing, the articles that we are going to discuss in today's session, there are three topics that we are going to discuss from the mains perspective. These are first, reconsidering the free movement regime on page number 10, the issue of genocide and the world court, and then choppy waters, which is again based on India-Maldives relation. And then there are three more important topics that we have for you. One, providing clean water for all, which is based on the Jal Jeevan Mission. Then center releases 3-drug regime for treating leprosy. And then finally 8,500 crore aid for coal gasification. So these are the important topics that we are going to take in today's session. Now let's first begin with this particular topic and this article that we have on page number 10. The article says reconsidering the free movement regime. Now this article is in the context of India-Myanmar border, and there was recently a statement that was released by our Home Minister Amit Shah, and this was about fencing of the borders between India and Myanmar. Now what he said is that the 1643 kilometers long border that India and Myanmar share, he said that now we will be looking for fencing of this border. Now there's a lot of historical context when it comes to this kind of decision or this kind of an announcement, and we need to also understand the historical underpinnings of it, and at the same time the cultural aspects of the border between India and Myanmar. So for that, what we'll do is first let's also have a basic understanding of a brief history between the borders between India and Myanmar, and at the same time all the other aspects of India-Myanmar relation in the recent aspects of all the political instability that we have seen in Myanmar, and at the same time the Act East policy that India has. So we need to understand all these things and some of the aspects of the history between India and Myanmar, and also the history of this particular area. So to begin with, the first thing that we need to understand is that here the context in which we are talking about is something called as the free movement regime. And what we are seeing here, what is being said is that the free movement regime that exists between India and Myanmar could come to a halt. Complete halt, that is. Now already this is something that we have seen a suspension of, that it was suspended in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, and also the instability that we have seen in Myanmar in the recent few years. So we already see that there is a suspension of this which has been done. Now going forward, what is being said is that it might, or something that a lot of political statements also have been made, that it might completely be removed. Now what do we mean by this free movement regime? The free movement regime means that there is an allowance of free movement of people across the borders between India and Myanmar up to 16 kilometers. Alright, people are allowed to travel up to 16 kilometers inside each other's country without any visa. And for this, the only thing that they need is a border pass, which is normally valid for a year. Now overall, when it comes to any visit, they would be able to come for a visit and stay up to 2 weeks of time and then come back. Now this earlier used to be up to 40 kilometers. Now it was revised to 16 kilometers along the borders. Now when it comes to this free movement regime, there is a historical context to it, that why do we even have a free movement regime here. So first and foremost, what we see is that there are a lot of cultural ties between people on both the sides. When the borders were drawn between India and Myanmar, it was not really considered who belongs where and what are the cultural aspects of the people, the societal aspects of people who are living in these kind of areas. Many places, the kind of borders that were drawn it was even dividing houses into two parts, or even let's say a village where people and families were living into two parts. So that's why there was not really a lot of consideration that was put into drawing of these borders at that point of time between the British India and Myanmar or Burma at the time. Now in this particular scenario, that's why we see that when it comes to the communities which are living in these kind of areas, the ethnic, cultural and the familiar ties that they have between these areas, that becomes very, very crucial in understanding of the fact that why do we even have a free movement regime, because the same communities, same parts of the ethnic cultures and the same kinds of the same parts of the families, they have been living across borders for very long time. So that's why this is something that we need to understand, and this is a border that was drawn during the colonial era. As I said that a lot of times it was also done arbitrarily, that it was not that it was taken into account that people have been living, or the same community or the same people have been living on both the sides of the border. Now this comes in the wake of, when we look at the history of the borders, it comes in the wake of the first Indo-Burmese war, and this first Anglo-Burmese war that happened between 1824 to 1826. Now when it comes to this war, this is where something called as the Treaty of Yandabu came into existence, and this was at the end of the first Anglo-Burmese war. Now in the wake of this particular treaty, this was in Yandabu, basically is the name of the village that lies in that area, which lies in this particular part of the borders shared between India and Burma at the time. Now Treaty of Yandabu also becomes very significant from the perspective of the fact that when you look at the 1800s and the era before that, there was a brief period in which the Kingdom of Burma had occupied some of the portions which now belong to India. So for example, when it comes to British India, the parts of when you look at some of these parts, even extending up to Assam, whether you consider Mizoram or Manipur or Assam, these kind of areas, they were areas which they were also captured by the Kingdom of Burma at that point of time. And when the British started expanding into the northeastern parts of the country, starting from Arunachal Pradesh to from Assam to Arunachal Pradesh to Mizoram to Manipur and Nagaland, in all these kind of areas, what we see here is that this is when they started extending, and the first war that was fought between 1824 to 26, this is when we saw that there was a receding of these powers, and the Burma from there on had to recede back. And this is when the British India again, British also captured all these areas back, and then it started to become a part of it. And this also, you can say, was the beginning for the Burmese capture also when it comes to the British. This is when, again, when you look at the second Anglo-Burmese war and the third Anglo-Burmese war, this is when British also started capturing Myanmar, and ultimately they were able to capture all these areas, starting first just getting them to recede, and then also capturing the parts of Burma. So this is where we see that this Treaty of Yandabu has a significance for the future from there on as well, that this is when the British started extending into the Burmese region. So now what we see is that this led to this particular treaty, and as a part of this treaty, for the first time, free movement regime was actually seen to be taking place. So this is where the free movement was allowed for the first time as a part of the treaty that we saw here. The treaty also meant the end of the Burmese power in India, and at the same time there were a lot of repercussions for the future of Burma as well. So now that came into picture, and from there on we see that when you come to the post-independence India, we understand that when it comes to the cultural ties between these two countries, the cultural ties always have been good, and since 1990s especially, we started extending even more and looking towards Myanmar with a lot of interest, because this is where first and foremost our Look East policy comes into the picture. Now, with the help of Look East policy, we started to strengthen the ties that we had with Myanmar, and we started looking after all the kinds of cooperation that was possible between the two countries. And then later on, we see that this Look East policy changes into an Act East policy, where as a part of this Act East policy, we see that now India tries to extend its ties not only to the South Asian countries and the Southeast Asian countries, but also starts to look beyond that and also into the Asia Pacific region. So Myanmar, in that sense, you can say, also becomes a gateway for us towards all those regions, which becomes very significant when it comes to the economic cooperation and the cultural ties that we have with all these areas. So in all these things, when it comes to the Act East policy, especially since the time that the Modi government has come into the picture, we see that they have been trying to enhance the relations between the two countries, especially when it comes to Myanmar and the role it plays, not only because of the fact that India wanted to extend its ties to the Southeast Asian countries and the Asia Pacific countries, but at the same time also to counter China, because Chinese influence in all these areas also have been increasing. And when we saw all these aspects, we understand that it becomes a very crucial problem for India if the Chinese influence in these areas, it's especially in case of Myanmar, if that influence increases, it will be a big challenge for India, because we have seen that one of the reasons why, even when it comes to the free movement regime, one of the reasons beyond when we look at beyond these political statements, what we also see is that there have been certain issues that we have faced in these kind of areas. One, with regards to the drug trafficking, we have seen that there has been a lot of incoming of the drugs from this area, especially the borders that we share with Myanmar. So that's why we need to understand that one of the issues that we have been talking about is the drug trafficking. So drug trafficking has been a very, very important factor here. And at the same time, one of the issues that we also have been seeing is with regards to poaching, whether it is, let's say, in the national parks in Assam or all these densely forested areas of Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, etc. Then in all these cases also what we have seen is that wildlife parts also have been smuggled a lot, and they have been smuggled out of India through these porous Myanmar borders. So that's why, in a manner, what we have seen is that wildlife body parts smuggling also has been happening through these areas. So that's why, from the perspective of security, we see that this porous borders at some point also becomes problematic, and we need to understand that perspective as well. That overall, when it comes to India-Myanmar relations, over the last 1 decade especially, we have been trying to make sure that the ties are better than what it used to be. There are various cooperations that we are looking at, whether through, let's say, the ASEAN Summit or Mekong Ganga project. So there are all these initiatives that we have, and even in the Bay of Bengal, we have seen that between India and Myanmar, we have been trying to better the relations between India and Myanmar, and with better maritime cooperation and even the joint military exercises that we have been trying to conduct in Bay of Bengal. So there also we see that Myanmar, we have been having better ties with Myanmar, we have been trying that, but at the same time political instability in Myanmar doesn't help, because for example 2021, the coup that happened in Myanmar, that also has been playing a big role in not letting these ties go forward. Now, as far as the free movement regime is concerned, there is one more problem that we see, that various states in the northeast, they have various, you can say, opinion on it. So, for example, when you look at three particular states of Manipur, Mizoram and Nagaland. In case of Manipur, what they have been saying is that they don't want influx of people from Myanmar, because especially because of the conditions that we have seen, whether at the time of the Rohingya crisis or also at the time of the another coup that happened a couple of years back. Because of that, we have seen that there have been a lot of civil movements out of Myanmar into the Indian borders. Now, in this particular scenario, in case of Manipur, we have seen that government of Manipur has been against all the people from these areas coming into the Indian borders, and they have been asking, and they also have been ensuring that many of these people also go back from these areas. So that also has been there. They even called out for NRC in Manipur, similar to the NRC in Assam. So we have seen this aspect in Manipur. But at the same time, when you look at Mizoram and Nagaland, they have been very accepting of the people who are coming from Myanmar. Because from that perspective, what they are saying is, because when it comes to the ethnic groups that have been living in the on both the sides of the border with Mizoram and Nagaland, especially, we see that the kinds of communities have been culturally very much connected with one another. So that's why they do not want any kind of disruption there, and that's why they are not in the favor, you can say, when it comes to the fencing of the borders or keeping the borders completely out of touch with each other. So for example, there are 40,000 odd people who have come from Myanmar towards Mizoram because of all the instability in Myanmar, and Mizoram has been very accepting of all the people who have come from there into Mizoram. So that's why we have seen that these three states, they have had different views with regards to whether they want people from Myanmar to come into India or not. So that's why there is a lot of complexity that we see, and the root of all this complexity goes back in time to the historic perspective and the cultural ties that these two areas have had with each other. So that's why from this perspective, it becomes very crucial for us to also understand all these aspects of relation between India and Myanmar, and how exactly it might help in building a solid future between these two countries, and making sure that we can establish positive relations in these areas. Coming to the second article, the issue of genocide and the world code. Now, in this particular scenario, we are talking about the case that was filed by South Africa in the International Court of Justice in December 2023. Now, this is a case that has been filed by them against Israel in the wake of the Israel-Palestine issue and the military operations of Israel that we see in Gaza. Now, what we see here is that there is a kind of complexity that we see in this scenario. For example, the way the conduction of some of the Western countries has been, and this is the context in which we have to understand this particular article. That first and foremost, what has South Africa done? What is what are the proceedings that South Africa has initiated against Israel? That's one. And then we have to also look at the various countries and who has been choosing what side in the wake of these proceedings. And at the same time, there are certain other similar cases that we have seen in the past, and what are the things that we can see going forward. Now, overall, when it comes to the issue of genocide and the world code, that is International Court of Justice, we need to understand that there are certain things that become very crucial in us also understanding the complexity of this entire legal aspect of it. So first and foremost, when it comes to the legal aspects, what we need to understand is the basic context of what is happening. That we are saying that South Africa has initiated the procedure in the International Court of Justice against Israel. Now, what they are saying is that this is something which is related to the prevention on and punishment of the crime of genocide. Now, when we say that this is something which is related to genocide, we also need to understand how exactly do we need to understand genocide, and what is the definition of genocide according to the rules of the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. Now, when it comes to this, first and foremost, what the definition itself says is that it is an act committed with the intention to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethical, racial or religious group. So this could be killing of members of the group causing serious bodily or mental harm. Alright, it's not only about the physical but also the mental harm, and deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction, imposing measures intended to prevent births, and even forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So there are all these things, and now what we see is that the International Court of Justice, they are saying that they will be hearing a provisional measure. This is something that they had said almost 10-12 days back. So now in this particular scenario, what happens in these kind of cases is that first and foremost we need to understand that when it comes to the deliberation of these proceedings, overall there are few things that we have to understand. That South Africa has initiated the proceedings and it has been supported by some of the countries and the regions. For example, let's say when it comes to the countries, the first two countries which started extending their support to South Africa in these proceedings were Jordan and Bangladesh. So Jordan and Bangladesh supported South Africa on this, and then later on we see that Latin American countries also supported South Africa, and then West Asian countries also supported South Africa. So they are saying that they would be on the side of South Africa in this particular scenario. But at the same time, when it comes to these procedures, what we saw was that, as I told you, that on 11th and 12th of January this month, some time was given, almost 3 hours each was given to South Africa and Israel on the fact of what's happening here. Now South Africa basically is saying that this is an act of genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza, and it must come to halt immediately. At the same time, what Israel has been saying is that they are not against Palestine, they are not against Palestinians, but rather they are against, their operations are against Hamas. Now in this particular scenario, we already know that when you look at the number of deaths that has happened in this particular scenario, it goes beyond 24,000 already. Now Israel, South Africa clearly is stating that it has to be seen as an act of genocide, and Israel is saying that it is an operation that they have against Hamas. Now this is where now the final hearing from the side of the International Court of Justice has to come, and they have to take the decision on basis of what they think is the deliberation here. Now, as I told you, on the side of South Africa here is Jordan and Bangladesh primarily, and then later Latin American countries and West Asian countries also have joined South Africa. On the other hand, when it comes to the side of Israel, we see that some of the strong Western powers have been supporting Israel on this. So for example, the United States of America, United Kingdom, Germany, France, in all these cases, we see that these are the countries which have been strongly supporting Israel on this particular matter in the International Court of Justice. Now overall what we see is that this is where some kind of understanding has to be there, that when we look at the legal context of what's happening here, there is something called as erga omnes obligation, that it is every state's duty to prevent genocide. And this is what South Africa has started with, that it's not and that's why when we look at the South African standing, we say they are saying that it's an obligation that they have to prevent genocide, and that's why they have initiated these proceedings against Israel. Now when it comes to these proceedings, what we have seen is that in the past it also has been related to a very similar case that was in the case of Gambia versus Myanmar a couple of years back. Now in this scenario, it is also very interesting to understand that when it comes to these proceedings that was initiated by Gambia in case of Myanmar, what we see is that in this particular scenario, some of these countries who are supporting Israel on this particular front, they were supporting Gambia in the previous case. So when it comes to the previous case, that was in 2022, we see that the International Court of Justice actually had decided that they, under the Genocide Convention, they would be ready to hear the application filed by Gambia against Myanmar. Now, in this particular procedures, what we see is that overall, the kind of military coup that we had seen in Myanmar and all the issues that the people at large were facing there, whether it is about deaths or human right violations, in all these cases, we saw that Gambia was the one to initiate the proceedings. And some of these countries, for example, when we talk about Germany, Germany in that particular scenario had supported Gambia in these proceedings. But in this point of time, we see that because Germany has closer ties in a manner, you can say, with Israel, and that is leading to this time they supporting Israel instead of supporting South Africa in this. So that's why it is also being criticized here, that I mean a country like Germany is being criticized here because they are saying that this time they'll be supporting Israel, and that's why if they have supported Gambia in the previous case, what compels them to not support South Africa in this case? So they cannot have two different set of rules for two different countries in the same kind of proceedings. So this is a kind, this is, you can say, a kind of controversy that is being created in this particular scenario. Now, when it comes to the debate also has to go beyond the laws. That we do understand that fine, this is the law and this is what the basis of these laws have been, or the basis of these proceedings have been, but we have to go beyond that. Now, for example, one of the criticisms of many of these international laws, including, let's say, international organizations like International Court of Justice, always have been that these are some of the organizations, some of the institutions that have been brought in place by the Western powers, have been brought by the in place by the US, or let's say the West European countries, and they always have been in a manner, you can say, they always have been at the core of all these organizations. So many a times what also happens is that some of these organizations, they cannot function very well because the entire idea on which they have been built comes from many of these powers. So when it comes to, let's say, countries from South Asia like India, or countries from Africa, or the South American and Latin American countries, many of the laws that have been made and many of the organizations that have been brought in place, suggestions from these countries were hardly taken. It was not that all these countries also had participated into making of many of these laws and many of these organizations, and that's why we see that many of these organizations and international institutions always have a tilt towards these powers, always have a tilt towards powers like the US or the West Asian countries, where we just discussed about countries like France and Germany. So in the wake of all this, it also brings us to the fact that we need to also go beyond, looking beyond just what is happening in this case, whether this side is right or that side is right, but also looking towards making laws and making international bodies and institutions that will also be helpful for, you can say, as we say, the global south, because the global south hasn't been a lot in the decision making in many of these cases. So that's why we need to understand and move beyond just the thinking of whether this law is correct, or whether that should be done or this should be done or not. So that's why the international order that we have as such, it is a test for the international order as well, that whether the international order always is going to give some kind of relief to all the Western and the powers which have been conventional powers, or is there something that the global south can also do, and is there a chance that the global south also gets something out of it? So that's why it becomes a very crucial thing here, and we need to understand, we need to look forward to what happens, and we need to see where the things go from here on. But right now we see that the complexity is not only about the fact that there is a proceeding going on, but complexity is also about the world order and how the world order functions altogether. Now, coming to the third article, and this is again on the editorial page, page number 8, choppy waters. Now something which has been in the news on and off for quite some time, the problems that we have seen in the relations between India and Maldives, and especially the kind of Chinese influence that we see in this kind of a relation. Now, last couple of days, we have been talking about the Chinese vessel and the fact that Chinese vessel has been spotted near Maldives, and then the clarification coming from the side of Maldives that this is not based on any kind of cooperation or anything. It is just something. It is not based on. I mean, it's not related to any research that they are doing in this particular area, and this is something that was only a routine. And clarifications came in these kind of situations. But overall, we need to understand that when it comes to India-Myanmar relations, there are a lot of issues that now we have been seeing between the two countries, and especially the Maldives, the current Maldives power is pretty much the entire election campaign that he had run was against India. The entire campaign that Mizu had run at the time of election was completely against India. The India out campaign, as we say, as he had run. Now, what we see is that all of that aside, we need to also understand the present issues and what the way forward is. And we need to understand that there has to be a way forward, because India needs to ensure that India cannot lose out on these kind of areas, because in the Indian Ocean region, Maldives becomes a very strategically placed country. So it's beyond some of the social posts and social media posts that we have done, and obviously the Myanmar side has been criticized because their ministers spoke in a manner which was very distasteful. Now overall, when it comes to Myanmar, what we are looking at, I mean from India's perspective, the issues that we see right now is the fact that there has been a shift in the foreign relations that we see, and under President Mizu, this has been a big problem because his entire campaign was against India. And overall, what we have seen is that they have started moving beyond India. They have been looking towards many of the other international powers where China plays a big role, and at the same time Turkey and UAE also have been some of the countries with which they have been establishing closer relations. So, and at the same time, recently we have seen that they have been also getting in touch with US. For example, the United States Indo-Pacific Command was also welcomed by Myanmar very recently. So that also leads to show that now Myanmar is looking towards diversification of their relations, and the close ties that they have historically had with India, that is something that is slipping out. And that's where the problem lies when it comes to India, because overall, when we look at the underlying issues that we have, there are two ways in which we look at the things. One, from the Indian side, where we have been strongly pushing and we have been becoming a global power. We have been looking to move beyond just being a regional power in the South Asian and the Indian Ocean region. We want, and we have been getting close to also becoming a global power in this sense. At the same time, when it comes to Myanmar also, when it comes to Maldives also, we see that Maldives' reliance on external forces for economic and regional security is where they have been also starting to look towards others. They have been recently, especially in the new political regime, they have been looking towards China. So in this particular scenario, we see that the relations between India and Myanmar, India and Maldives has been becoming more strained as compared to whatever we have seen until now. So that's why it is, you can say, about time that the countries have to intervene and look into betterment of these relations between the two countries. So we need to understand and look towards a way forward, that is there something that can be done, is there something that we can do in this particular scenario. Because overall, when it comes to India has been still making efforts to maintain influence in this particular area, and to ensure that we have a strategic presence in Maldives and the areas around Maldives. Because when it comes to India's Indian Ocean strategy, the maritime strategy in the Indian Ocean, this is where Maldives always is going to play a big role. And we very well understand that we cannot just sever the ties that we have with Maldives. So that's why we are talking about this quite diplomacy, that we cannot just let go of the relations that we have, and we need to quietly also need to ensure that we are looking towards having ties as we usually have had with Maldives. Then at the same time, economic consideration for the Maldives is also very, very important, because we need to understand that Maldives is economically dependent on India also up to an extent. That, for example, when you look at the tourism data of Maldives, you will see that India is among the top 3 countries as far as the number of people visiting Maldives is concerned. So that's why Maldives cannot just lose out on Indian tourism, because the number of tourists, the amount of economic benefits that they drive out of Indian tourists is not something that they can just overlook. At the same time, there is an economic dependence also that we see with regards to not only tourism but also the repayment of a lot of money, a lot of debts that they have. So it's not entirely easy for them to just overlook India in these kind of matters. And they also need to understand this, that from the perspective of over reliance on China, this is also not something that would be good for them in long term. We have seen that happening in some of the various different parts of the world, where a country has been over relying on China and then they fall into the debt trap of China, and they have so much of debt that it becomes impossible for them to get out of Chinese influence. So that's why they need to understand that it's not going to be easy for them in long term if they think that this is a way out for them and India out campaign would work for them in long term. That perhaps will not be the case for them as well. So from our perspective, it becomes very crucial for us to maintain that relation because we understand the value of Maldives in the Indian Ocean region and the strategic importance that will have for the Indian maritime border. And at the same time, for Maldives also, it becomes very, very crucial because they know that their tourism is heavily dependent on Indian tourists, and at the same time there is a big debt repayment that they'll have to do if they simply just want to sever the ties with India. And they need to understand and take leaf out of the page from what other countries have seen when they have overly relied on China. Look at the conditions, for example, in Pakistan or some of the African countries. We see that this is where they all have faltered because of their over reliance on China. So that's why that also cannot be the case, that today you have an India out campaign and 10 years from now then you will have a China out campaign and again try to have an outreach towards India. So that's why from both the perspectives, whether from Indian or the Maldives perspective, it's better for both the countries that you maintain relations in a manner that you have the cordial relations as we have been able to maintain for such a long time. So that's why more than what the issues are, we need to understand what the way forward is and what India and Maldives, both these nations, need to do for the coming days. Now coming to some of the important articles largely from prelims perspective. First article that we have is providing clean water to all, and this is in the context of Jal Shakti mission. Now when it comes to the Jal Jeevan Mission, now this is a very, very important article because it also comes with a lot of data points with regards to the achievements that we have seen in this regard, because this particular campaign has been seen to be one of the most important campaign when it comes to the government, that the present government, and especially the decisions that they have taken in the last 3-4 years. So overall, that's why it becomes very, very crucial to understand where this program is right now and what are the various aspects of this program. So a very well written article. I mean, this is an article written by the Union Minister for Jal Shakti Mission, and this is about the Jal Jeevan Mission and everything that we have been able to achieve with regards to the Jal Jeevan Mission. So what beyond what this article says, I mean just about what this article says, the data points, of course I understand that the data points that have been associated with this article can become important, but you also need to understand that this, when it comes to this mission, it has been a very important mission for the government of India. There are certain aspects, for example, they are talking about supplying piped water to all the rural households by 2024. And as the article mentions, that we have been able to get to up to 73% of the population in this regard. So that's why this is one major aspect of the Jal Jeevan Mission. Then at the same time, we also are looking at a lot of local management of water and ensuring that whatever demands are there, whether it is demand for consumption of water or even the water that is required for domestic consumption, in all these cases the water supply has to be ensured. And overall what we observe is that when it comes to this mission, and that's why it becomes very crucial, because as it has been mentioned that they have been able to add more than 14 crore rural households to this, and something that was just at 3.29 crores in August 2019 now has gone beyond 14 crores rural household. So that's why from that perspective it becomes very crucial to see all the improvements that we see here. And this article itself and the examples that he has started with is from all these areas that have had a lot of scarcity of water in the past, whether it comes to the parts of Uttarakhand or Jharkhand or Maharashtra, the case studies that he has been taking, that becomes very, very crucial for us also to understand that how the supply of water has been playing a big role or can play a big role in ensuring a better lifestyle and a better, you can say, overall value for life in all these areas. Now, when it comes to this mission, one major important factor from prelims perspective that we need to also look at is the sustainable development goal. And sustainable development goal, especially when it comes to sustainable development goal 6, this is about providing water, safe and affordable drinking water, and providing and ensuring better lives for people who have been dealing with scarcity of water, and at the same time clean water, they have been struggling with availability of clean water. So that's why in all these cases we see that it becomes very, very crucial in achieving the targets of SDG 6, and that is what also is related to the Jal Jeevan Mission. So that's why from this perspective, especially the Jal Jeevan Mission program and everything around it becomes very crucial. And it's not only about the mission and everything that we have seen as a part of the mission, but at the same time we see that there are other aspects of the mission as well. That what we also see is that, for example, when you look at the data with regards to clean water availability and what lack of clean water availability can do. So for example, the study that has been quoted in this particular article about that almost the infant death rates can be reduced by almost 30%, and potential to prevent 25% of the under 5 deaths in India lies only with providing clean water. So that's why it becomes very, very crucial. At the same time, the World Health Organization also states that there are more than 4 lakh cases of diarrhea every year. So in all these scenarios it becomes very crucial for us to see that prevention of whether diseases or prevention of deaths, this is where clean water and sanitation plays a big role. So there also it becomes very crucial. And at the same time there is another scheme also that has been mentioned here, that is the Nal Jal Mitra scheme. Now this, when it comes to this particular initiative, this is a specialized program for skill development. Alright, this is a specialized program for skill development for the people who are living in these areas, so that all the local requirements with regards to the development of infrastructure and, let's say, repair work, etc., for the future can be taken care of by them. At the same time, the article also talks about the fact that there is a kind of regionality also that they have taken into account and made sure that according to the regional requirements, the regional demands that you have in a particular area, that is also being fulfilled. So for example, let's say when you are trying to supply water in places like Uttarakhand or in Himachal Pradesh, where the temperatures can drastically be low, insulated water supply, insulated pipes is very, very crucial. So that's why those kind of things are also being taken into account and being ensured, so that water supply is not only just about providing the connections, but also ensuring that all these connections can give provide the clean water and the required under the required regulations. So that's why they have taken into account the requirements of the local regions and accordingly what all is needed to ensure the supply of water in all the rural households. So we see that that's why there are all these aspects of this particular mission, and that's why I talked about the data, that there are a lot of data that sustainable development goals have also talked about, that how exactly we need to ensure that all the problems in maintaining a healthy lifestyle which happen because of non-availability of clean water and sanitation, all these can also be taken into account, and it will help in improving the overall life quality of any individual in the country. Now, one more article, and this is about center releases 3-drug regimen for treating leprosy. Now, when it comes to leprosy, we know that government has an aim that the sub-national leprosy cases have to be eradicated by 2027. Now, when it comes to leprosy cases, you have to also understand this, that leprosy in the context of India especially is a very problematic disease, because number of cases, one of the data released by WHO had stated once that more than 60% of the cases of leprosy are alone only in India, and most of the cases anyway are in South and Southeast Asia. So we know that for India it is a big problem, because the global numbers may not be that high, but the Indian numbers are very high. So for India it became very, very crucial, and we have been working on various vaccination programs and everything that we can do for ensuring vaccination against leprosy. Now, first and foremost, what is leprosy? More than, again, I mean, what kind of drug regimen is being suggested by the government may not be as important as this particular disease itself is. Now, when it comes to leprosy, leprosy is where we see that when it comes to leprosy, it is something which is associated with a very slow onset of the disease. That onset of disease can take up to 5 years of time. So that is why what happens is that if, let's say, there is a patient who has started showing symptoms of leprosy, before that it's quite possible that the family members and everyone living with that person for a very long time would have also been infected with leprosy. Now, leprosy is not a disease that very quickly transfers or transmits from one person to another. It's not like many of the other diseases that we have seen, many of the, for example, viral diseases that we have seen, where the transmission is very quick. Here, the transmission from a diseased person to a healthy person is very slow. It can take up to 5 years of time for the transmission to happen. So that's why if, let's say, you have just come across somebody who has leprosy, or you just have been in touch with a leprosy patient for just a day or so, then in that case it does not lead to leprosy, it does not transmit that disease. But somebody who has been living with the patient for a very long time, these are the people who have the threat that they might also develop leprosy, and leprosy can be transferred to them. So we see that there will be some common symptoms that we will see in leprosy, and then most importantly the skin lesion symptoms will start later on, and this is where it starts to become problematic, and overall it can even lead to nerve damage symptoms also in severe cases. Now, overall what happens is that when we look at leprosy, the causes of leprosy mainly is a bacteria which is Mycobacterium leprae, and from this we see that this can lead to the onset of the disease. Now, at the same time, what we observe is that it will happen, as I told you, when you have a prolonged close contact with a leprosy affected person. And when it comes to leprosy prevention, we, as I told you, that we have been trying to uh, work with various organizations, and we have been trying to come up with a vaccine against leprosy, and we have seen improvements there. All the vaccines now are available. The Indian made vaccine also is available, called as mycobacteria. I mean, this is something that was brought in by Dr. Pran Talwar. His name comes in very crucially when it comes to any leprosy vaccine. And the kind of fight that he has had almost for 30 years, he has been working for leprosy vaccine, and ultimately he succeeded uh, in making vaccine for against leprosy. But there are internationally available vaccines also today. Now, when it comes to leprosy, one more thing that becomes very crucial for us to understand is eradication, especially for India, becomes very crucial, because as I told you that Indian number of cases are higher as compared to the worldwide cases that we have seen in case of leprosy. And that's why our struggle with leprosy is very, very important as compared to any other country, because that's why we do not see a lot of support from a lot of Western countries, because there the number of prevalent cases of leprosy is pretty low as compared to what the number of cases are whether in India or South Asian countries or Southeast Asian countries. So that's why there's all those things. But thankfully now we have the vaccine. The initial pilot program for with leprosy vaccine was started by Government of India a few years back, and these vaccines are being given to the people who live in the close vicinity of the people affected with leprosy. So for example, the family members of the leprosy patients, these are the people who are the first ones to receive the vaccine. So for example, it started with two states, Bihar and Gujarat. These are the first two states that were picked by the Government of India, and they started with the leprosy program, leprosy vaccination program in these two states. And then after that, we see that there are other states also where now it has been extended, and now there are internationally available vaccines as well. So there is a better, you can say, focus from the side of Government of India on leprosy prevention program now, and we are targeting an eradication of leprosy cases by 2027. But overall, when it comes to leprosy vaccine and the fight with leprosy vaccination programs, it has been very long fight for India and the Indian doctors and scientists. I don't know whether you know this, but there was even a film that was made back, I think, late 80s. There's a film called as Ek Doctor Ki Maut, where you have um, a doctor's struggle in making the vaccine and getting the approval for this vaccine. So it's a wonderful film to watch, and Pankaj Kapoor is the lead actor in that movie, and it actually just shows all the struggle that we have seen with regards to bringing in the leprosy vaccine. Now coming to our last article of the day, and this is about a very small article that we have on page number 15, and this is rupees 85 crore aid for coal gasification. Now coal gasification is something which has been constantly in the news for the last couple of years, because of the budget allocation that has been done, the funds allocation that has been done, the coal ministry report, the annual report by the coal ministry, or whether if you look at the reports submitted by the Coal India. So we see that in all these cases there is one common thing that they have been constantly talking about, and that is coal gasification. So let's just try to understand, what do we even mean by coal gasification? What is coal gasification? Now, as the name tells you, coal gasification, meaning that we are gasifying coal, meaning that we are converting coal into gas, or rather extracting gases from coal. All right, extracting, this is about extracting gases from coal. Now when we say that we are extracting gases from coal, what we basically mean is this gas that we are talking about is called as syngas. This gas is called as syngas, and this syngas is a combination of hydrogen and carbon monoxide largely, plus traces of carbon dioxide, small amount of carbon dioxide. So this is called as syngas, also called as synthesis gas, or also called as synthetic gas. And now this syngas, when we talk about this syngas is something which is very, very crucial from the perspective of our energy future. Because with coal gasification, understand why are we spending so much money on coal gasification. The last year Coal India report and Coal Ministry report says that now there are various coal gasification plants that are being built in India. Now why exactly? The whole idea here is that we want to generate electricity with coal gasification. We want to generate electricity with coal gasification. Now, why generate electricity with coal gasification? Why are we looking at this? The main reason here is, first and foremost, efficiency. That what we observe is that the efficiency, the amount of electricity that you can generate per unit availability of coal from coal gasification is much higher as compared to the normal combustion of coal. The coal-fired thermal power plants that we use, compared to that, coal gasification gives you a better output, gives you a higher efficiency. At the same time, this is a cleaner process. This is a cleaner process. So because it is cleaner process, it gives you higher efficiency. The efficiency as per the reports can be as high as 95%, whereas the normal combustion of coal in coal-fired thermal power plants, it is just around 33 to 35%. So that's why here the efficiencies are much higher as compared to the efficiencies that we have seen in normal combustion of coal. And that is why coal gasification plants, because what India wants is that by 2030 we should be able to achieve a big success in coal gasification, and coal gasification should become our primary source of coal electricity generation in the future. So that is where coal gasification becomes very, very crucial. So coal gasification is nothing but extraction of gases from coal, and this gas is nothing but syngas. Now syngas has a lot of uses. The use is not only in generation of electricity, but at the same time in also manufacturing of various chemicals. For example, fertilizers. In fertilizer industry also we see that coal gasification, or especially syngas generated out of this plays a big role. At the same time, you also get hydrogen here, right? You also get hydrogen here. So it also becomes a method for hydrogen extraction as well. So that's why it will help in hydrogen extraction. It can help in fertilizer industry, and it definitely is going to help in generation of electricity. So that's why there is so much focus that we are now putting on coal gasification. And I'm very sure that the budget is about to come in 1 week. You will see that in budget, or at least in economic survey, in one way or the other, we'll see the mention of coal gasification in one way or the other. So that's why it becomes a very, very crucial topic for your examination going forward. Now, in case of coal gasification, what we simply do is that the coal that you have, instead of the normal combustion of coal, normal combustion of the pulverized coal that we do in thermal power plants, here the coal will be heated at a very high temperature. We go up to 1200 to 1500 degrees Celsius in heating that coal, and then this is when we see that chemically they change in a manner that syngas can be extracted from here. And that's why from the perspective of the entire process, we see that it is much cleaner. The ash production is very low, the carbon emission is very low, and that's why we are talking about a better efficiency and a cleaner process altogether. So that's why this 8500 crore aid for coal gasification altogether becomes very, very crucial, because this was a decision that was just taken under the chairmanship of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So this is what you have to know, and just keep following with regards to anything that happens in the case of coal gasification. So these are the articles that we have for today. Now let's also look at some of the questions with regards to the articles that we discussed. First question: discuss the strategic significance of the bilateral relationship between India and Myanmar in the light of recent developments, including the implementation of the free movement regime and the challenges posed by the political situation in Myanmar, and evaluate how these dynamics impact India's role and objectives in the broader Indo-Pacific region. So as we discussed that Myanmar's role in India establishing better relations with the Indo-Pacific nations becomes very, very crucial, and that's why we have to look at this, and we have to write the answer to this question in the context of not only the free movement regime and the aspects related to it, but at the same time also have to understand the various aspects of Look East policy and the ever-changing dynamics of India-Myanmar relations, and what are the various ways in which the cooperations between India-Myanmar relations can work. So that's why we have to take into account all those things that we discussed in the article. And then the second question, examine the evolving dynamics of India-Maldives relation, discuss the implications of these changes for India's foreign policy and regional strategy, particularly in the light of neighborhood first policy, and analyze the potential challenges and opportunities for India in maintaining a strategic balance in the region. So that's why here you have to understand that we see that in the last couple of weeks, or last 3 weeks or so, we have seen that there has been a lot of lot of controversies between India and Maldives, and a lot of social campaigns also that has been run between these two countries. So now we have to look forward, and we also have to understand that there are major there is a major importance for India, and we need to always ensure that we take any decision in accordance with all the importance that we have in this particular region. So this is it for these two questions. Just a quick announcement that tomorrow, on the occasion of Republic Day, we will not have any edition of the Hindu analysis, and the next time we come to you will be on 27th of January. So please go back and let's also go through these articles and revise these articles, all the static areas, the context that we have seen. It will all help you all in the examination. With this, let me end the session here. Thank you very much for joining.